According to the Department of Education, there are over 2.7 million students in Florida public schools. One representative wants to make sure that there's more flexibility in complying with the class size amendment. Joining me is Florida House Representative George Moraitis of the 93rd Legislative District. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Candace. It's a pleasure to be on the show this morning.
Now, for those people who don't even know exactly what the amendment says in the Constitution, what does it spell out in terms of class sizes that people need to follow?
Right. It provides for specific caps at the elementary, middle, and high school level. And it also says specifically that the legislature is responsible for funding achieving class size compliance, because there was a concern before the amendment was passed that the legislature was not appropriating enough money to do this.
So in terms of what's going on now, you want to see more penalties for people who don't comply with this amendment. What's going on now in terms of people and their accountability with this class size?
Well, it's interesting. There's actually, initially, the amendment doesn't say anything about a penalty if you don't comply. It really talks about funding in terms of the legislation. And the good news is we've done that. We're going to spend over $3 billion again this year towards helping school districts achieve class size compliance. The penalty right now, though, believe it or not, which is not in the Constitution, was something the legislature passed to try to encourage the districts to meet the class size. It provides a penalty based on a specific class by class. In other words, if you look at any particular class in the school and they're over that cap, there's a penalty. Charter schools, which are types of a choice option, another type of public school, their penalty is computed at the school-wide average, meaning that if there's one class, let's say that's at 16 students and another one's at 19 students, maybe the 19's over the limit, but if you average the two out,
I see.
Then, and under my proposal, I would say there would be no penalty in that example, similar to how charter schools are treated. We also allow schools of choice, the magnet schools, the flexibility with the penalty to compute at a school-wide average as well. So it's really only the traditional public schools that don't have this flexibility. It has been a hardship for some of the school districts, and there's also been all kinds of sort of super heroic efforts, and in some cases I would say efforts that aren't in the interest of the child to meet this requirement because of the fear of the penalty.
Right, they have to start shifting.
Right, an example is AP classes are not subject to the class size limits. So there might be a child that should not go into an AP class, but the school might say, well, I'm not going to get penalized, so I'm going to push them into an AP class, which is really a disservice not only to the child, but also the other children in the class. Or they might use some type of an online class, which may not be as good as sitting in a class with an excellent teacher at the school. So we really feel that we want to give the administrators the tools to administer the school effectively. We feel that the penalty is in some ways getting in the way of effective administration. And
really, what are the penalties, by the way?
Well, the penalties, I can't say I have the exact numbers on hand,
okay,
but our school district a couple of years ago had to pay about $1 million. And not only that, the penalty is actually isn't used to reinvest in the school to achieve compliance. Under the current regime, the penalty is actually used to give money to other districts in the state that are achieving compliance. So it's really not even, the money for the penalty is not even going for a good purpose. It's going to be redistributed. So
it's all about process.
Right.
In terms of, okay, the formula that you're using to make sure that penalties are properly distributed, so to speak. I would imagine, too, that obviously the classrooms aren't disrupted, meaning more consistency for students, and we know that means a lot in terms of how it plays out in a student's academic journey. Are you seeing that there's been frustration that students on a personal level have been shifted to a point where they're just not having a good academic experience?
Well, I've definitely heard some information like that. I've talked to different principals. Our superintendent, Runcie, who's doing a great job with attempting to achieve class size. He's done a super job with that, but he has seen in some cases where there had been disruptions to meet this. For example, let's say you're at the limit, and then a family moves into the neighborhood, maybe has a couple of kids, and so now you go over the limit. Well, should you start displacing children out of that class, or if you have classes that are underneath the limit, should you be allowed to sort of within that penalty not be penalized? And so again, it's just bringing a more common sense, reasonable approach to the penalty to really achieve what we want to do, which is to use the money for class size compliance.
And are you getting a lot of support for this?
We've had amazing bipartisan support for this bill the last couple of years that I've introduced it. So we're very optimistic again this year.
All right, we'll have to have you back for an update. Good to see you.
Thank you, Candace.
All right, I'm Candace Kelly, and we've been speaking with Representative George Moraitis for this special edition of Comcast Newsmakers from the state capitol in Tallahassee, Florida. Thank you for joining us.